So hello everyone and welcome back to my latest video. It's been a little while since I put a video out. I had a little break over Christmas and then I've gone back to work and I've got an awful lot of work to do in my day job. So it's just slowed me down a little bit, but I did want to put out this little video for one of my subscribers. I'll go through that in a minute. I've got a lot of things coming up this year, looking at Portal a lot more. I've got some updates to existing game modes, and I've also got some information about the game mode that I put out, the wave-based game mode that I put out just over Christmas. And a little tutorial and guide that goes alongside that. And I'm also looking at the comments and looking for ideas, the kind of things that you would like to know, and I will slowly go through those over the course of the next few weeks and months. I'd also like to say thanks for getting me to 500 subscribers. I didn't imagine that that would ever be possible, but I have done, and now of course my next target will be 1,000. I don't know whether I'll ever get there, but of course if you're watching this video and you get anything out of it, please do consider clicking the subscribe button. It really helps me get towards my target, and if you could take the time to press the like button, that helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and pressing the follow and share button of course would be absolutely awesome. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at a request from one of my subscribers, Links Productions. You can see the little conversation on the screen there. He did ask a couple of weeks ago if I could go through this, and I said that I would do, but obviously with Christmas and the delays, I haven't managed to get round to it, but today's the day. I have sat down and just pieced together this video for you and for anybody else that might be interested in knowing this. And you can see that the request there was, is there a way to make it so that when all players die in the match, it gives the win to the remaining player? And obviously I can think of many scenarios where that might be necessary or needed, and in this video today we'll be looking at the free-for-all game mode. So if you are the last man standing, awarding the win to you. But I'll also slip it in there, the team deathmatch mode, and if you have wiped out the other side in a team deathmatch mode, it will award the win to the team that has players remaining. And there's a lot of game modes that use that particular method as well. And I know that I've had a request for a Rainbow Six Siege type mode. That little technique that you're going to learn today will play into building that sort of mode as well. So without further ado, let's get on with the little tutorial to work out if you are the remaining player in the match. So here we are in the first part of this video, and in this part of the video we're just going to have a look at the free-for-all mode, and we are going to look at giving the win to the last player remaining in the match. We're not going to bother looking at all of the extra stuff just here. I have set some settings just to make it a little bit easier for me to test the mode, but the code that you need is really rather simple. So just to get started, I've set up a few rules just to test. You don't really need these rules, but I'm just going to run through these rules so you know how I'm testing the game. So you can see in this first rule, we've got a rule that says on game mode started, we've disabled the game mode win condition. This is important because in the free-for-all and the team deathmatch modes, the win is based on the number of kills. So there's a kill limit and the player with the most kills wins. We don't want that to happen. We want the win to be assigned to the player that's the last alive. So we need to disable the game mode win condition. That is pretty important, and you do need to put that in your code. I have added this little bit of code that spots all the AI players. Obviously that's got nothing to do with the win, but it did make it easier when it came to testing. So in this case we just make sure that all of the AI players are spotted when they are spawned in. I'll just zoom in a little bit. So if you want a piece of code that's something like that, that's pretty useful. Okay, and you can see that this will only run, it's an ongoing mode, and it will only run if the player is an AI player and that player is alive. So every time an AI player spawns in, it's going to spot them, and you can see just underneath it says while the player's state is that they're an AI player, and while they're alive, spot them for a second and wait. And I've used that code quite a lot. It's particularly useful when testing, if you don't want to run all the way around the map trying to find the enemy players, just to test that the thing that you're working on works. So next we've got this, and this is pretty important. This rule is a rule that you will need. So you're going to need to make sure that you have disabled the default game mode win condition. Implement this rule at the top. Look, I've not named that rule. So disable win condition. Let's just sort that out. Okay, so you're going to need to make sure that you've got that at the top, and then this bit under here, we've got this little piece of code that runs when a player is on irreversibly dead. Now this is important because we want to check whether you are the last person alive, but only when the other player has irreversibly died. Now we could run this on check player earned kill, and we could do that. However, in this case, I do think it's better just to do it on player irreversibly dead, because that means that they are actually out in the deploy screen and they are not deployed on the map. And that's pretty important, I guess, if you're working on a squad-based game and there is the possibility for a member of their squad to revive them. So if we run the check last alive on irreversibly dead, we know that that player has just been removed from the battlefield. So every time somebody irreversibly dies, we are going to check whether we are now in a position to award the win. You'll also notice that we have disabled, in this case, the deploy for the player that has just died. You don't have to put that in there if you don't want to. Obviously, it depends how you want your game mode to work. This will work whether you stop people from deploying or whether they're allowed to redeploy. And if you think about a reason why you might not want to disable their redeploy, you might want to allow them to redeploy. If you set the redeploy time, let's say for a certain period, it might mean, for example, in your game mode, there are 5 opposing players, and to win the game, you have to down all of those 5 players before they can redeploy. So there are different scenarios and different game modes. That's not what we're going to look at today. But in this, you'll notice that I have made it so that they cannot redeploy. Last but not least, in this rule, we've got a subroutine called check last alive, and I think that it is that will be the important point for you if you're watching this video. We'll just run through that in one moment. Last but not least, we're going to put a little message on the screen. This helps for testing, but it also helps the players. You can see show number alive, ongoing global. So we've got a little message box that's going to continually run while the game mode time remaining is above 0. And you can also see just underneath that it says while greater than game mode time remaining, display a custom message, players alive, and then we've got a little parameter here, and we are going to use this long piece of code, and it's this that's pretty important for the other bit, for the subroutine that we're going to do. The count of function counts how many items are in the array. The filtered array returns an array based on some condition, and the condition that we have set is that in the get players array, get back to us, filter out any players where their status is that they're alive equals true. Now what that means is that we are going to get a count of the number of players that are alive. And now I hope that that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, don't worry too much. Just copy the code as we have done before. But what you'll see is then this message box will continually be refreshed as the game runs with a count of the number of players that are currently alive, and you can see it just waits 0.1 seconds before looping back around again. Right, okay, so that's the basics right there. That's just going to set us up. So how do we check whether there is one player left remaining and assign the win to that player? So we've got up here, when a player dies, check last alive. So let's have a look at this subroutine. You can see it's really very short. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to get rid of this bar at the side so we get a little bit of a freer view. You can see, so I can spread that out a little bit further. So that's the code that we need. So you can see that we've got a condition. So this subroutine will only run when this condition is true. And this condition is we want to check. We've got an equals around the edge, so something equals. Let's just pull this out a little bit. So something is equal to 1, and what we want to get is the number of players that are alive equal to 1? Hopefully that makes sense. And it is this little function just here that is going to get that number for us. Now you should have already worked out that this is the same as that function because that's updating the number of players alive. We're just going to check to see whether this is 1. So we're going to get a count of, again, we're going to filter the get players array, and we are going to check the player state of every element of the get players array, and we are going to check to see if their state is alive is equal to true, and that is going to return us a count of the players that are currently in the game that are alive. So we know that if this has one element in it, if after we've filtered that array there is only one player left with a state that they are alive, then the count is going to be 1, and we will know that equals count of, we get 1, is equal to 1. there is only one player left alive. And that gives us a win condition. That's it. So if we have a subroutine, feel free to copy this subroutine and place it wherever you want. But if we check the condition and make sure that it's equal to the number of players alive is equal to 1, we know that we've got one player alive. So all we've got to do is figure out who that player is and assign the win to them. So we're going to set a variable. I've already created a global variable called last alive, and it's going to hold the player who is left alive. We're going to use another array function called first of, and first of gets the first element from an array. In this case, if we filter the array based on the same condition as before, so we're going to get a filtered array with any player who is still alive. If there's only one player left alive, then that array is going to contain one player, the one player that is left alive. And if we get the first element in that array, it's going to be that player, isn't it? Because there's only one player in the array. So we know that if we assign this player to the last alive, we know that they're the last player, and then we've just got some final fishing off bits to do. We're going to display a game mode message. Last player alive wins. The winner is the player that's stored in that variable. We're going to wait 6 seconds just to give them the pleasure of looking at the last alive message, and then we are going to end the game mode and assign the win to the player in this variable. End game mode just ends the game, and if you look just there, if you weren't aware, you give it either a player or a team. In this case, we're going to give it a player, and it's going to assign the win to that player. So that's your subroutine. So anybody that's looking for a subroutine in a free-for-all game mode that assigns the win to the last player alive, so when one player is left alive, it assigns the win to them, that is the code that you need. I'll just leave it there for a moment and then move on to checking the squad win, which is just a little bit more tricky, but uses a very similar technique. So here we are back in the code, and this time we're going to look at how to assign the win to the team who still has players left alive. So if we're talking about Team Deathmatch or some other game mode, if Team 1 has wiped out all of the players in Team 2 and they are all dead at a particular point, this will assign the win to the team that is remaining. So very similar to before, we are going to just set the game mode started rule, disable the win condition. We're going to set the win condition to false, obviously, because we're going to determine when the game mode ends. And then we've got this same rule again. Not spend any time on that, but obviously I've spoken about this before. We're just going to spot all of the AI players. That's just for testing, but it is a useful piece of code if you want it. And then we've got the check last alive function again and again on player irreversibly dead. It's going to disable the deploy. You don't have to do that if you want to. As I said, it depends on the game mode that you're trying to create. And then we're going to run the check last alive subroutine. So next we've got the rule that displays the message, and obviously this message is going to be slightly different depending on the team that you're on. Obviously it depends on what you're trying to create in your game mode, but in this case we are going to show each team how many players are left alive on the other team. So this little rule here does that. It's just a little bit of a tweak on the rule that we did in the previous section of this video. You can see we've got a condition. It's just an ongoing one, but this time we've assigned it to the player, and we need to assign it to the player rather than globally because the message is going to be different depending on which team the player is in. We have our condition that forces it to run, which is greater than game mode time remaining 0. So whenever there's still time left in the game, this subroutine is going to start. And then we've got a while loop, which is basically going to keep this message displayed throughout the game, and that's going to keep going while the game mode time remaining is greater than 0. So now I'm just going to disable the toolbox again so we can get a closer look at this if statement that's inside. Now previously in our other section we only needed to display one message to all of the players, but here we need to display a different message depending on which team the player is on, and you can see that inside this if statement. So we've got two different messages, and depending on who the event player is, so which player we are currently showing the message to, they will get a different message depending on their team ID. So you've got if the team ID of the event player equals 1, show them this message, else if the team ID of the event player is team ID 2, then show them this message. Now we could be a little bit more efficient here if we wanted to. You could say more efficient, I guess, and we could create a variable and store the count of inside this if statement and then move the message out and just have one display custom message displaying that variable. The problem with Portal is you have a limit of the number of variables, so actually if we cut out as many variables as we can do in the process of writing these little blocks of code, we do get a little bit more flexibility in the number of variables that we have available, because we may need those variables for other things. So now all we need to do is get a count of the number of players that are alive on the other team and display that in a message to the player. So we can see this is quite a long function. We're going to use a very similar technique to the one that we did for our last section, only in this case we need to filter out the players that are alive and on the other team. So let's have a look how that works. So we've got display custom message, and we've got the message, and then we're saying players alive left on other team, and then we've got this little parameter just here that's going to take its value from this subroutine. So just let's have a look what that says. We want a count of, and then we're going to filter the get players array. So let's just pull that out. So we want a count of whatever's returned from this subroutine filtered array, and we're going to filter the get players array, and we have got this time two conditions that we are going to filter this on. So let's pull those out. We want an and this condition and this condition need to be true. So let's pull that one out. We've got the first condition, which is the same as it was in the last section. So if the current array element, if their state is alive, is equal to true, then it's going to get those. It's going to filter on that basis. But we also want them to have the team ID too. So if equals current array element get team ID 2, that is going to filter out the correct players. So if we do this, if we piece this back together, we are going to get a count of, in the get players array, the number of players that are both alive and have the team ID too. Let's piece this back together again. So we've got count of, filtered array get players. Let's just zoom in a little bit. And the condition that that's going to be filtered on is these two. So we've got and is that player's state that they are alive, and do they have the team ID 2? Because this player that we are displaying this message to has the team ID 1, so we want to check that we're filtering out players in team ID 2. Before I just slot this back in again, just pay attention to the message, the custom message. You'll see that when we display it, we are going to display it to the event player. I had quite a few people saying that their custom messages aren't displaying or displaying incorrectly. You must put in the extra parameters for this display custom message or it won't work properly. So we're going to display this in the custom message slot, the header text. We're going to display it for a second, and it's going to be displayed to the event player. So that's this player. Right, let's stick that back in. So if the player is on team ID 1, display the players left alive on the other team. And you can see I'm not going to run through this bit, but we've also got the same thing but the opposite. If the team ID of the current player equals get team ID 2, you can just duplicate that block of code, but in this case you should be already there thinking about this, but we need to make sure that the team ID is equal to 1. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to try and zoom out a little bit. No, it's going to be too far. So that just shows or keeps the players updated in the game with how many players are left alive on the other team. But just like the last section, we can use this little block of code to check the end game win condition. So again, this check last alive subroutine is going to run, and this is really the important block of code that we're after. And you can see that this is just a little bit more complicated than the other one. So you can see that I've used two variables, one to store the number that is left alive in team 1 and one to store the number that is left alive in team 2. So when this subroutine runs, the first thing it does is figure out how many people are left alive in team 1 and how many people are left alive in team 2, and uses that as the basis as to whether to run the following rules. You'll also notice that we have set no conditions because we actually have two values that we need to check. You can see that we've got this AND statement here, and it says does the value in variable numAlive t1 equals 0 and the value in numAlive team 2 equals 0, and if they've both got no players left alive, then it's a draw. So we could get rid of that get variable function. So we've set that value in this variable to be the count of, and we could just move that count of into there. So that's the first half of it, and we could do the same with variable 2. But if we just zoom out a little bit, you can see that that has made that very, very long. And obviously if I take this one out as well, we are going to get a very, very long line of code indeed. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. That is going to save you 2 variables if you want to do it that way. However, for this and for everybody's sanity watching this video, I'm just going to go back to the way that it was. So here we are back the way that we were, and we've got 2 variables. We're setting 2 variables. So when we run the check last alive subroutine, we are going to set the variable numAlive t1, and we're going to set the variable numAlive t2, and we are going to compare them and see if either team has no players left alive, and set the win to the correct team. So you can see we've used this count of again, the exact same function as before. So we'll just decompose this first one. You can see that the first one and the second one are just duplicates of each other. This first one checks team 1, this second one checks team 2. So we've got, let me zoom in a little bit. We have got count of, and we are going to filter our get players array. We have 2 conditions, so we want to AND this condition with that condition, and the first condition is, oh, let's pull that one out. We've got, does the player state of the current array element that they're alive equal true? And then we've got the other bit, which is, does the team ID of the current array element equal 1? So you can see we just drag that back in, and let's go, we've got a filtered array. And we've got count of. So that is going to get us the count of the number of players that are still alive in team 1. And you can see, just scroll across a little bit, the second part of that is the same as the first, only we're getting the number of players alive in team 2 instead. So all that's left for us to do now is to figure out if either or both of those teams has no players left alive, and assign the win to the other team. So if you have a look here, we've got an if statement. We have 3 conditions that we're going to check. We're going to check first if both teams have no players left. So we've got and if the variable numAlive t1 equals 0 and the variable numAlive t2 equals 0, that must mean no team has any players left alive. We're going to display a game mode message. That's going to be the banner at the top, all players killed, it's a draw. We are going to wait 6 seconds, and then we are going to end the game mode and assign the win to team 0. That effectively gives you a draw. If you look in the help for that particular message, you can see it says the game mode ends in a draw if team ID is set to 0. Then we've also got else if we get the variable numAlive team 1 and that equals 0, team 2 wins, wait 6 seconds, assign the win to team 2. And last but not least, we've got this final else if the numAlive in team 2 equals 0, display a game on message, team 1 wins, and assign the win to team 1. And hopefully that all makes sense. Now, there are a number of ways of shortening this code and making it a little bit more efficient, but I think that the way that is laid out makes it a little bit easier for everybody to understand. I've just noticed that we've got these extra parameters on here. They're kind of cast over because I did copy the code from the previous section, so we definitely do not need those blocks of code in there. So let's just make sure we get rid of those, and that will be our finished code then. So I'll just leave that there for a moment. You can copy that. That's the win condition just there. And we do need to make sure that we have got a count of the players in team 1 and 2. And hopefully you've got all of that. I'll just leave this. Let me just zoom out a little bit. It's a bit too far, isn't it? Let's go a little bit. That should give you the whole section of code if you want it. And I'll just leave that there for 5 seconds or so that you can copy it if you need to. So we'll just have one quick run back through what are the important parts that you need from this particular section of code. You need to make sure that you are disabling the game mode win condition. You need to make sure that you have a rule that runs when the player is irreversibly dead, and it runs the check last alive subroutine. You don't need to disable the redeploy if you don't want to, but I have done. You can, if you wish, display a message showing them how many players are left on the opposing team. If that's what you want to show them, that's fine. And then last but not least, and this is the important bit, you have a subroutine that looks like this, that gets a count of the number of players that are left alive on team 1 and team 2, and then compares them and checks to see whether they are 0 or not, and assigns the win to the appropriate team. Right, okay, thanks very much. That's it for this video. Hopefully that was useful. You may need to watch it a couple of times if you've missed some of the code. I am speeding through the code a little bit quicker at the moment. Please let me know if I'm going too fast or if you can't follow what it is that I'm trying to do. It does allow me to get through larger pieces of code in a shorter space of time, and I will be trying out different ways of presenting this to make it easy for you to follow, but not too onerous or not too long. So if you've got anything out of this video, if you have found it useful, if you are going to use this code in your own modes, please do consider clicking the subscribe button. Do appreciate every single subscription that I've got, and it will help me work towards 1,000 subscribers. It might take me a little bit of time to get there, but I will do, I hope. Obviously clicking the like button is very useful. That helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and also sharing this and clicking the follow buttons so you get notification of any of my upcoming videos. As everybody knows, I do check my comments regularly. I'm always looking for ideas. I do try to get a couple of tutorials or guides out each week. Please continue to give me suggestions. I can't get round to them all, unfortunately, but I will try and do as many as I can over the coming weeks and months. So what did you think of this? Was that okay? Was it useful? Please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to hear about game modes that you've created. I do like to test them out. I am a Battlefield player myself. If you look at the videos, you will see that. I enjoy the game, play with friends, play my own modes regularly. So I'm always happy to take experience codes from you and try them out for myself. We do enjoy it. But for now, with this video, I think that we have come to an end. Thanks for watching this. As always, I really appreciate every single one of you, especially if you've watched this all the way to the end. And I'll talk to you all in my next video. Thanks very much.